On some occasions, he would even instruct her to browse the net, searching for escort websites to find male workers. And after the drugs were hired, drugs were supplied during these freak-offs, which Cassie said helped her dissociate from the traumatic experiences. When the party was over and she was back to her consciousness, she would erase videos of these encounters from her phone. But Diddy claimed he still had access to them. And on this one flight, he forced her to watch a video she thought was deleted. In general, Cassie accused Diddy of battery, assault, and violating NYC's gender-motivated violence law. But here's the twist. Before filing that lawsuit, she demanded $30 million under the threat of writing a book that would detail the dark secrets of their relationship. When Diddy failed to pay, her attorney filed a lawsuit, but it was settled overnight. Like literally. Diddy and Cassie reached an agreement barely hours after that lawsuit was dropped. Cassie even dismissed her entire case with prejudice, meaning it cannot be filed again, even in the future. It was obvious some crazy deal had gone down, but Cassie's lawsuit exposed way too many things about Diddy for it to be swept under the carpet. And it just so happened that surveillance footage obtained by CNN completely lined up with a story from the lawsuit. Cassie talked about how in March 2016, after one of them freak-off parties, a drunken Diddy struck her in the face, resulting in a black eye. When she then tried to sneak out of the hotel, he woke up and pursued her into the hallway, pushing her to the ground and throwing glass vases at her, which shattered everywhere. Diddy paid the hotel $50K to secure that footage, but eventually CNN got a hold of it. And in 2018, Cassie's lawsuit also claimed that Diddy broke into her apartment and hit her while she repeatedly screamed no and attempted to push him away. Now, even though the lawsuit was settled, it opened the floodgates for multiple others, and ultimately for the shocking discoveries made inside Diddy's mansions.
I had with Cassie and Sean. Basically, he would mess tell me what to do to Cassie. I had like 15 encounters, and I heard lots of business.
A week after Cassie's lawsuit was settled, 2 more women came forward on Thanksgiving with unsettling allegations against Diddy. One of them claimed that back in 1991, when she was a student at Syracuse University, Combs had drugged and assaulted her. She also said he filmed the attack and later shared that video as an act of revenge for Diddy denied the accusations through a representative who stated,
"This last-minute lawsuit shows how a well-meaning law can be misused. This 32-year-old story is fabricated and lacks credibility."
An old interview with ex-star Jonathan Odie then resurfaced online, where Odie claimed that he was hired as one of Diddy's slaves. Odie had been arrested in 2018 for opening fire at one of Donald Trump's golf courses. And the video came from his interrogation where Miami investigators were questioning him. During that time, Odie claimed to have had sex with Cassie and Diddy during 15 different encounters. He claimed that Diddy would meet and direct him on what to do to Cassie.
I was like a slave, okay? For them, that's what I was. That's all, alright?
Odie doesn't stop there. He goes on to say he got an STI during the encounters and took drugs while involved in the situation. None of Odie's wild claims ever got proven, and back in 2018 when it came out, Combs thought he was just off his rocker. And now, looking at it, doesn't it line up way too well with what's going on in Cassie's lawsuit? Like, it's really hard to believe it's all just a coincidence or some made-up story. It's almost too much for it not to be true, right? Well, just hold on to that thought, because we're going somewhere. Let me cook. On November 23rd, 2023, another woman, Lisa Gardner, filed a 22-page lawsuit against Diddy and Aaron Hall, accusing them of...
That's fine where the,
According to Gardner, she met both of them at a Jodeci album release party in New York. And after the event, Combs allegedly invited her and her friend to Aaron Hall's place for an after-party. That's where she claimed Diddy pressured her into having sex. And as she was getting dressed, Aaron Hall reportedly stormed in, held her down, and assaulted her as well. Gardner said she felt intense pain afterward and ran out of the apartment. Later, she learned that her friend had also allegedly been assaulted by both men. The day after, Gardner claims Diddy showed up at her home, assaulted her again, and her until she blacked out. Other women have also come forward with allegations of abuse against Diddy, but one that really caught the attention of law enforcement came from Rodney Lil Rod Jones Jr. a record producer from Chicago.
Giovanna, in a 79-page lawsuit filed by a music producer who claims to have worked with and lived with Sean Combs for a period of time, alleges there were underage, hidden cameras, and sexual harassment at his home.
February 2nd, 2024. Lil Rod files a 105-page federal lawsuit against Diddy, accusing him and his people of running an illegal racketeering operation. In the complaint, Jones says he has undeniable proof of Diddy and his enterprise moving and using a variety of drugs, along with flashing and handling unregistered guns, plus getting involved with sex workers. Jones claims that in 2022, Diddy reached out to him to help produce some tracks, but the work Diddy had for him went way beyond music. The lawsuit says he had to score drugs and line up sex workers to perform acts for Mr. Combs' pleasure. Jones said he had to record these acts, and if he didn't do what was asked, Diddy often threatened to hurt him. Jones claims bottom line is he's getting as far away from jail as proteges took the fall. Initially, Lopez and Diddy were charged for that shooting, but charges against Cuddy's car did.
What if everything we knew about Christmas was a...
Ventura felt that saying no to Mr. Combs would cost her something. Her family, her friends, her career, or even her life. And even when she attempted to leave him, Diddy dispatched his associates to bring her right back. In 2012, Diddy became enraged about her dating Kid Cudi and threatened to blow up Cudi's car, which Cassie said helped her dissociate from the traumatic experiences. When the party was over and she was back to her consciousness, she would erase videos of these encounters from her phone, but Diddy claimed he still had access to them. And on this one flight, he forced her to watch a video she thought was deleted. In general, Cassie accused Diddy of battery, assault, and violating NYC's gender-motivated violence law. But here's the twist. Before filing that lawsuit, she demanded $30 million under the threat of writing a book that would detail the dark secrets of their relationship. When Diddy failed to pay, her attorney filed a lawsuit, but it was settled overnight. Like literally. Diddy and Cassie reached an agreement barely hours after that lawsuit was dropped. Cassie even dismissed her entire case with prejudice, meaning it cannot be filed again, even in the future. It was obvious some crazy deal had gone down, but Cassie's lawsuit exposed way too many things about Diddy for it to be swept under the carpet. And it just so happened that surveillance footage obtained by CNN completely lined up with a story from the lawsuit. Cassie talked about how in March 2016, after one of them freak-off parties,
he's guilty.
drunken Diddy struck her in the face, resulting in a black eye. When she then tried to sneak out of the hotel, he woke up and pursued her into the hallway, pushing her to the ground and throwing glass vases at her, which shattered everywhere. Diddy paid the hotel $50K to secure that footage, but eventually CNN got a hold of it. And in 2018, Cassie's lawsuit also claimed that Diddy broke into her apartment and her while she repeatedly screamed no, and it opened. And back in 2018, when it came out, folks thought he was just off his rocker. But now looking at it, doesn't it line up way too well with what's going on in Cassie's lawsuit? Like, it's really hard to believe it's all just a coincidence or some made-up story. It's almost too much for it not to be true, right? Well, just hold on to that thought, because we're going somewhere. Let me cook. On November 23rd, 2023, another woman, Lisa Gardner, filed a 22-page lawsuit against Diddy and Aaron Hall, accusing him of assaulting her. According to Gardner, she met both of them at a Jodeci album release party in New York. And after the event, Combs allegedly invited her and her friend to Aaron Hall's place for an after-party. That's where she claimed Diddy pressured her into having sex. And as she was getting dressed, Aaron Hall reportedly stormed in, held her down, and assaulted her as well. Gardner says she felt intense pain afterward and ran out of the apartment. Later, she learned that her friend had also allegedly been assaulted by both men. The day after, Gardner claims Diddy showed up at her home, assaulted her again, and her until she blacked out. Other women have also come forward with allegations of abuse against Diddy, but one that really caught the attention of law enforcement came from Rodney Lil Rod Jones Jr., a record producer from Chicago.
Giovanna, in a 79-page lawsuit filed by a music producer who claims to have worked with and lived with Sean Combs for a period of time, alleges there were underage, hidden cameras, and sexual harassment at his home.
February 2nd, 2024. Lil Rod files a 105-page federal lawsuit against Diddy, accusing him and his people of running an illegal racketeering operation. In the complaint, Jones says he has undeniable proof of Diddy and his enterprise moving and using a variety of drugs, along with flashing and handling unregistered guns, plus getting involved with sex workers. Jones claims that in 2022, Diddy reached out to him to help produce some tracks, but the work Diddy had for him went way beyond music. The lawsuit says he had to score drugs and line up sex workers to perform acts for Mr. Combs' pleasure. Jones said he had to record these acts, and if he didn't do what was asked, Diddy often threatened to hurt him. Jones claims Diddy kept specific bottles of alcohol just for women, and believes Diddy had spiked the daily on liquor with ecstasy. And finally, Jones also would accuse Diddy of harassment and assault, saying Diddy grabbed him without consent and forced him to work while walking around naked. He even claims that Diddy once left him alone on a yacht with Cuba Gooding Jr., who started touching, groping, and
these goddamn coordinates. Hold on, you guys. I'm gonna kill these cunts in this goddamn family, I swear. $73, $69.1. $321, $234. $321, $234. $234. $914. $914. 18313. 18313. -8. Okay.
fondling his thighs close to his groin, and only stopped when Jones pushed him off. Now you see why federal agents can't simply walk into Diddy's mansions with suits and briefcases? You understand why they had to use some level of force to get in immediately. Lil Rod's lawsuit was filed, and the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, and other agencies in New York began investigating the whole Diddy situation.
They
There
knew
are
when he
more
was
than
going to be
7
in there.
lawsuits filed against Diddy in the last year alone. The feds understood that they had the potential for a RICO case here, and since multiple victims have claimed Diddy recorded these sexual assaults, they were more concerned with gathering as many electronic devices as possible. They would have to storm Diddy's mansions without prior notice, just so no evidence was tampered with or concealed. Homeland Security tore down his walls, went through his safes, and even ransacked his wardrobes, looking for the smallest hard drives, cell phones, or computers that could contain some kind of incriminating evidence. And apart from the thousands of bottles of baby oil found at his mansions, feds had uncovered multiple electronic devices, allegedly containing footage of Diddy and some other celebrities engaging in sex at his mansion, and even different hotels across the U.S. They would find drugs and unregistered AR-15 guns in both homes. Months later, Diddy was indicted by a grand jury and finally arrested on September 16, 2024 in Manhattan. So what does this mean for Diddy now? Why is everyone talking about Justin Bieber, Usher, Jay-Z, and Beyonce? And what is the fate of Diddy going forward?
Tony Busby has taken on 120 clients who say they were assaulted by him over the years. He says some of those clients are from Houston.
The day will come when we will name names other than Sean Combs, and there's a lot of names. And of course, I already know who some of these individuals are, but because of the nature of this case, we're going to make sure that we're right before we do that.
After his arrest and indictment, people are now drawing parallels between the music mogul and the notorious Jeffrey Epstein, who found himself in a similar situation, but ended up committing prison. At least that's what the media tells us. Now, there's a lot of money involved in this case, a long list of powerful people in Hollywood, and a ton of victims who have been silenced over the decades. So apart from the litany of assault charges
You
against
fucking
Diddy,
niggers.
what
I'm
exactly
gonna
is
slit
he
your
being
throats.
charged with? And what's in his indictment? Now, the first thing you need to know is that Diddy's facing two kinds of cases. One from the federal government, and the other from all the civil lawsuits by individuals. Now, the Fed's indictment alleges that
getting 8 ads every 20 minutes is actually diabolical. Meet Pi, the ad blocker that actually works on Twitch, aka every user.
That Diddy and his Combs Enterprise crew, including senior supervisors, security, household staff, and personal assistants, were behind the organization of the freak-offs. These wild parties, filled with drugs and involved booking hotel rooms and stocking them with necessary items. The rooms had an array of controlled substances, baby oil, lubricants, extra linens, and lighting to set the scene. Cassie also said in her lawsuit that she was told to pour excessive amounts of oil on herself at these events. Now, Combs' staff were also instructed to clean up these parties to reduce damage, arrange travel for the victims, and order IV fluids, along with a large amount of cash to allegedly pay workers. Guys, did you hear what I just said? These freak-off parties got so intense and draining for the performers that they got pumped full of IV fluids. I mean, what type of sick shit is that? And there's more. The indictment also claims that during these events, Combs hit, kicked, threw objects at, and even dragged his victims by their hair. The charges allege that Combs subjected his victims to physical, emotional, and verbal abuse to force their participation in these events. He would maintain his control using physical violence, promises of career opportunities, and even financial manipulation, as well as tracking their movements, controlling their appearance, monitoring their health records, and providing them with drugs. So you can imagine these victims felt trapped, believing they couldn't resist his demands without risking their livelihoods, or even suffering physical or emotional abuse. And to top it off, Combs would record it all to make sure that his victims continued their silence and obedience. And because of all this, Combs is now facing charges of racketeering conspiracy. That's a serious charge, used mainly aimed at taking down organized crime leaders, and can lead to a significant prison sentence. However, Diddy has pled not guilty to all charges and is still being held in a Brooklyn jail after he'd been denied bail twice. Mark Agnifilo, Diddy's attorney, stated that his client is prepared to contest this with all his strength and determination. During a recent court session, he argued that the alleged freak-offs, lengthy sessions that prosecutors claimed include hired workers and women pressured into sex for pleasure of Combs and others, were consensual. In his words, he said,
Is this trafficking? No, not if everybody wants to be there.
yeah, okay, so how can they consent when they've been drugged? Anyways, that's an angle the prosecutors are probably going to attack from. And if we're talking about baby oil, there's a lot of discussion about it online, with memes and AI photos of what it must have been like, all stacked in Diddy's home. But anyway, here's what Diddy's lawyer had to say about it.
I mean, there's a Costco right down the street. You know, I think Americans buy in bulk, as we know. And, you know, this is
Because America's a fat fucking nigger honky cunt.
Now we know the whole story of the Diddy case. We know what he's charged with, and we know what they found during that raid. If Diddy's been hosting these freak-offs for decades, then why are we just learning about it now? Well, apart from the fact that Diddy's a very rich and influential.
We gotta do some, what do you call it? Crew motor fest. I'll be right back. to Candyman story. The story behind Candyman, Mr. Ballin. Candyman, you fucking niggers. The real story behind Mr. Candyman, Mr. Ballin.
Mucinex Night Shift fights your worst nighttime symptoms, so you can get to sleep and wake up ready to go. How could you?
Today's story inspired a popular horror movie, and when you get to the reveal in this story, you'll understand why. It is literal nightmare fuel. But before we get into that story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So, if that's of interest to you, please sneak into the like button's house and toast all of their bread and then leave. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story. One day in early January of 1987, a very strange 52-year-old woman named Ruthie Mae McCoy walked out of her 11th floor apartment in Chicago, Illinois. Today was the day that Ruthie was going to be doing one of her self-appointed public duties. Ruthie was quite tall, and this particular day, she had on 2 pairs of pants with a dress over them. She also had her favorite long stick she was carrying. And as Ruthie marched down the hallway, she began jiggling each of her neighbor's doorknobs to see if they were unlocked. And then in between the doorknob check, she would suddenly stop and wave her stick around like it was a sword, and she was fighting off some unseen attacker. And so after Ruthie had checked 4 doors in a row that were all locked, she reached the 5th door, and when she tried the doorknob, it was unlocked. And so without any hesitation, Ruthie pushed the door open, she stepped inside and began yelling, "Hey, look at me, I'm inside of your apartment!" And the woman who lived in this 5th apartment was in her kitchen making dinner at the time, and when she looked up and saw Ruthie barging into her apartment, she wasn't scared, she was just totally annoyed. She rolled her eyes and then began yelling at Ruthie to get out now. But, as always, Ruthie didn't listen. And before long, Ruthie had moved from the doorframe into the apartment, into the kitchen, where she was waving her stick around wildly and berating this young woman for leaving her front door unlocked in this very dangerous apartment building. The young woman yelled at Ruthie a few more times to try to get her to just leave, but Ruthie didn't budge, and so eventually this young woman picked up the phone and called 911. It would turn out the 15-story apartment building that Ruthie and this young woman and all of their neighbors lived in was indeed a very dangerous place to leave your front door unlocked. In fact, at the time, in the late 1980s, this particular apartment building was considered to be one of the most dangerous places in all of Chicago, with a murder occurring there nearly every week. Gangs basically ruled the building, which was totally falling apart and totally decrepit, and had these long, dark hallways that thieves and killers could hide in. And so Ruthie wasn't wrong in trying to get her neighbors and killers could hide in. And so Ruthie wasn't wrong in trying to get her neighbors to keep their doors locked. And so Ruthie
building hallway
wasn't wrong in trying to get her neighbors to keep their doors locked, but her very hands-on approach to delivering this message was never met with appreciation from the people who lived on her floor. Instead, her neighbors viewed Ruthie as potentially more hazardous than anything Ruthie was trying to protect them from. However, in reality, Ruthie was not a threat to her neighbors. She was just totally mentally unstable and basically afraid of everything. For example, whenever Ruthie got mail, she would just assume that it was terrible news and most likely about someone coming to take all of her money. And when Ruthie was out in public, which was quite rare, she was so scared of strangers that whenever she passed them, she would just yell out obscenities at them to keep them away. And then also, when Ruthie was in public, she never ate because she was afraid strangers were going to literally run up and take her food. So, back inside this fifth apartment that Ruthie has barged into, Ruthie was busy berating this young woman about her unlocked door when the police did finally show up and they dragged Ruthie out of the apartment into the hall. The police, by this point, knew Ruthie really, really well, and they were not about to arrest her. They knew she was harmless, but just kind of out of her mind. And so, like they always did in this situation, they told Ruthie to leave her neighbors alone and just go back into your apartment and mind your own business. Ruthie usually would mutter something under her breath about needing to increase the security in this building, but she would eventually do as she was told, and she would go back home. And that was basically Ruthie's life in a
fucking nigger.
nutshell.
I'm gonna slit your goddamn throat.
Exacerbated tenfold by her very poor mental health. But Ruthie was not content with her life.
No, nigger.
She, like virtually everybody else
fucking
in this
nigger.
high-rise apartment building, wanted to get out and live somewhere else and have a better life. But Ruthie, like virtually everybody else living in this high-rise apartment building, did not have enough money, and so she was trapped there. But then, in February of 1987, so 1 month after busting into that woman's apartment, Ruthie got incredible news. She had recently begun going to a day program for psychiatric care at a local hospital, and the staff there had really taken a liking to her, and they were going above and beyond trying to help Ruthie kind of get her life together beyond just her mental health. And so one of the things they were doing with her was helping her apply for various government programs like disability payments. And so that month, in February, Ruthie found out that the application they had sent off for her was approved, and so Ruthie was entitled to disability payments, which meant right away she would get a check for $2,000, and then every month going forward, definitely she would get a payment. It wouldn't be $2,000, but it would be a lot of money. Ruthie was beside herself. She could not believe her luck. And she now knew that with this money, she would finally be able to move out of that terrible apartment. Even before the money began coming into Ruthie, she was already looking for a new place to live. And as she did this, all she could think about were her two beloved grandchildren, a little boy and a little girl. They were the only people in the world, it seemed, to Ruthie that really accepted her and just loved her unconditionally. And so whenever Ruthie would go visit her grandkids, the three of them would sit on the ground and just play together for hours and hours. But to that point, Ruthie's grandkids had not been allowed to visit Ruthie at her apartment because it was too dangerous. But now that Ruthie was going to move into someplace much, much safer, she knew that was going to change. She was going to see her grandkids so much more often. And this made Ruthie so happy. And this newfound happiness inside of Ruthie really motivated her to start looking at other aspects of her life and see if she could improve them. And so,
hate those idiots.
If she liked one of them, she would write them a letter, and in this letter she would praise them for their sermons and how incredible they were, and she would ask them to bless her with miracles. And these miracles were often just centered on her health. She wanted to look and be younger. And some of these TV preachers, who were actually just running scams, would write back to Ruthie and say, of course we can bless you with your miracles, but first, send us some money. And so, when Ruthie's disability payments began coming in, even though she needed to save every penny to be able to afford moving out to start this beautiful new life with her grandkids, she still found a way to set aside some of that money and sent it off to these TV preachers. And soon, these preachers were sending things back to Ruthie. Things like a blessed piece of wood for her to sleep on, or bottles of water said to be from the Holy River Jordan. These spiritual items were often accompanied with a letter from these preachers telling Ruthie that in order for them to fulfill her miracles request, she would need to keep these spiritual items close to her and also send us some more money. And so Ruthie did as she was told, and after sending off all this money, she would excitedly wait inside of her apartment for her miracles to come true. And while she waited, she began tacking up all these newspaper articles all over her apartment of these people who miracles had happened to them. That supposedly God had fixed their teeth or eradicated a tumor in their brain or cured them of cancer. And in all of these stories, the person who the miracle happened to would describe looking in the mirror one day and just looking different. And that was the moment they knew that this miracle had occurred. And so Ruthie, believing this was bound to happen to her any day because she was working with these TV preachers, began going to her bathroom mirror all the time and just looking at herself, looking for some visible change in her appearance that would indicate one of her miracles had come true. But by April 22nd, so roughly a month after finding out she was going to be receiving these payments, and this was about 2 weeks before she was set to actually move out into her new place, she had still not seen any sign in the mirror that she had changed, and so she believed these miracles had not happened yet. But something else had begun happening when she was in the bathroom looking at herself in the mirror. And that was, she would hear somewhere off in the distance the sound of someone talking to her. It was almost like they were whispering to her, but she couldn't quite tell what they were saying. Now, Ruthie wanted to believe that these disembodied voices had something to do with her miracles coming to fruition, but Ruthie was naturally a very paranoid and scared person, and so she couldn't help but be a little bit scared of these voices. And so that afternoon, when Ruthie was on the bus headed back home after a doctor's appointment, she told a friend on the bus about these strange whispers she was hearing, and Ruthie would also say that she felt like these whispers meant that somebody was out to get her. Now, Ruthie's friend knew Ruthie really well, and this just wasn't unusual behavior for Ruthie. Ruthie routinely thought people were out to get her, and she talked about hearing voices before in the past. And so this friend told Ruthie that, you really should tell someone about this, but deep down, this friend was not that concerned. This was kind of normal Ruthie behavior. This couldn't be a big deal. However, it would turn out to be a huge deal. Today's video is sponsored by NordVPN. Suck down some tried to log into the I'd heard us. You choked down rocket. Space generation and a special deal. You can months guarantee. That's no okay, back to the story. That night around 8:45 p.m. when Ruthie was back home at her apartment, she called 911. And when the dispatcher answered her call, Ruthie was in a total panic, and she was talking about something to do with the cabinets and with her bathroom and how her neighbors wanted to use her bathroom. And the dispatcher just did not understand. And they tried to ask Ruthie some clarifying questions, but Ruthie just could not put together a coherent sentence. Bathroom room, and the dispatcher just did not understand. And they tried to ask Ruthie some clarifying questions, but Ruthie just could not put together a coherent sentence. And so the dispatcher told Ruthie that they would send police over right away. And then afterwards, the dispatcher would put out to the officers in the area that, hey, Ruthie McCoy seems to be having some sort of argument with her neighbors over cabinets. I don't really know, but someone needs to go check it out. And when the officers got that call, they were not quick to respond. They knew Ruthie. They knew that this was likely nonsense. But 15 minutes after Ruthie called 911, 911 got another call from somebody else inside of Ruthie's apartment building, and they were calling to report hearing loud noises coming from inside of Ruthie's apartment. And so at this, the police did act quickly. They rushed over to the apartment building. They went to the 11th floor. They went to Ruthie's door, and they began pounding on her door because it was locked. But Ruthie didn't come to the door, and it was totally silent inside of her apartment. And so at some point, the police called back to dispatch and asked them to call Ruthie on the phone she had just used 15 minutes earlier to call 911. And so these police officers are standing right outside of Ruthie's door, and they're listening to the sound of Ruthie's phone ringing inside of her house, but Ruthie didn't answer. Again, the apartment stayed totally quiet. And so the responding officers turned around and began walking down the hall, knocking on other people's doors, and began asking them, hey, did you hear any loud sounds coming out of Ruthie's apartment? And everybody said no. And so the police eventually just kind of gave up and left, despite not seeing Ruthie, not talking to Ruthie, not seeing what's going on inside of her apartment. The next day, when one of Ruthie's friends on her floor noticed that Ruthie had not come out of her apartment all day, and when she knocked on the door, Ruthie didn't answer, this friend called the police. The police came out again, they knocked on Ruthie's door, and after a while, when she didn't answer, the police again just left. Ruthie's friend, who had called the police, was furious that the police were not taking this seriously, and so she wound up contacting maintenance of the building, and a janitor went up to the 11th floor, went to Ruthie's door, drilled through the lock, and pushed her door open. The janitor immediately yelled out for Ruthie, but there was no response, and so he stepped inside and kind of looked around, and right away he was struck by two things. One,
oh, you fucking nigger.
Inside of her apartment. There were all these religious books and pamphlets all over the ground, but as messy as the apartment looked, it also seemed weirdly empty. Like there was no TV, there was really no furniture or anywhere to sit. It was almost like this apartment had been half moved out, and then whoever was moving it out had just kind of stuck. The janitor started to get a really bad feeling about being inside of this apartment, but he mustered the courage to walk a little farther into the apartment to look into the bedroom. And when he turned the corner and looked into that bedroom, he froze, because there on the ground was Ruthie McCoy. She was lying on the ground in a pool of her own blood. She was dead. The police were called.
What the fuck?
Feeling about being inside of this apartment, but he mustered the courage to walk a little farther into the apartment to look into the bedroom. And when he turned the corner and looked into that bedroom, he froze, because there on the ground was Ruthie McCoy. She was lying on the ground in a pool of her own blood. She was dead. The police were called, they came out, they walked around her apartment, and they concluded that this was kind of an open and shut case. Ruthie must have opened her door for the wrong person who came inside and killed her. Remember, this apartment building saw one murder nearly every week, so this really was kind of routine. And just a couple of days later, the police would arrest a 19-year-old living in this apartment building named Edward Turner because he was found to be in possession of Ruthie's TV. Edward did not admit to doing anything, but the police assumed that, he must have tried to rob Ruthie, and in the course of this robbery, perhaps Ruthie had tried to fight back, at which point Edward had overpowered her and killed her. But the police did suspect that there was at least one other person involved in Ruthie's murder, so they did keep investigating. And then, in June, so about a month and a half after Edward was arrested, the police began hearing this very disturbing rumor about the building where Ruthie had lived.
Oh, shit. Are lionfish deadly? Because the surveillance mines, but deaths from their stings are rare. Okay. I want to go to this place.
The police completely dismissed it because it sounded totally made up. But when it kept coming up over and over again, whenever they interviewed anybody in this building about Ruthie's murder, the police finally decided they had to at least look into it in order to confirm that it was not true. However, when the police looked into this rumor, they would discover that it was true, and it absolutely played a role in Ruthie's murder.
So sad.
Sweet home. Welcome back, Chief.
Get the fuck out of here.
Back on the night of April 22nd, 1987, so the night that Ruthie called 911 in a panic, saying something about her cabinets and her neighbors and her bathroom, well, what had really happened is Ruth was home around 8:45 when she heard this loud banging sound coming from her bathroom. And then before she could go over and inspect the bathroom, her bathroom door flung open, and standing in the doorway was this dark, tall figure who just suddenly took off running through her apartment, out her front door, out into the hallway. Ruthie was so startled she had no idea what to make of it. She knew that sometimes she saw things that weren't real, and so she likely struggled to figure out, did that really happen? Am I dreaming? Am I hallucinating? What's going on? And so with all these thoughts going through her head, she called 911 to get help, but she couldn't quite describe what had even happened. And so that's why she began rambling about how her neighbors wanted to use her bathroom and the cabinets were somehow involved. It was all very confusing. And so the dispatcher obviously didn't understand what was going on, but they told Ruthie, okay, I'll pass this along and the police will be out soon. And so as Ruthie is waiting for the police to show up, she wanders over to the bathroom where this dark figure
Oh, you motherfucker.
and she walks inside and she
God
looks at
damn
where
it.
her mirror had been above her sink. The mirror that she had spent so many hours looking into, hoping for signs of a miracle, and the mirror was gone. And in its place was this big dark hole on the wall, almost like an entrance to a dark tunnel. And as Ruthie is staring at this void, she sees these two dark hands emerge underneath that come out of the hole and
I'm
grip
surprised that they're
onto
dark.
the sink. And then eyes pop up, and a man's head pops up, and then he uses his arms, which are clutched onto the sink, to pull himself up and out of the hole in her wall, where he plopped down on the bathroom floor, and then stood up and stared at Ruthie. And then everything after that point would have happened really fast. Ruthie likely began screaming, at which point the first man, the dark figure that had run out into the hallway and prompted Ruthie to call 911, he must have heard Ruthie screaming, and so he came running back in through the front door into Ruthie's apartment with a jacket over his head, and then at some point he or the other man who had come out of the hole in the wall yelled at Ruthie to get down on the ground. Maybe she didn't comply, maybe she did, but after that, 4 gunshots rang out. All 4 shots hit Ruthie. However, these 4 shots did not kill Ruthie right away. And so Ruthie was very alive as these 2 men stole her TV, they stole her rocking chair and some other things, and Ruthie was almost certainly still alive when the police did finally show up and began knocking on her door and calling her phone, but she was bleeding to death. She couldn't move, she couldn't make a sound, but the police just abandoned her, at which point she did die. It would turn out that disturbing rumor that the police heard about this apartment building was that apparently people in this building had learned that you could pull off your mirror inside of your bathroom and literally climb into the walls. And from that point, you could basically wander all over this building and then punch other people's mirrors in their bathrooms in, and then climb through that hole and do whatever you wanted to the people inside of that apartment. And so when Ruthie began hearing those whispers when she was in her bathroom looking at the mirror hoping for a miracle, those were the sounds of thieves and killers and criminals slinking about her wall. Detectives speculated that the 2 men who killed Ruthie likely found out about her disability payments and decided to rob her. However, The two men that police arrested, the 19-year-old Edward Turner, who was found in possession of her TV, and this other man who was also arrested, were ultimately acquitted because there were so many people crawling through the walls all day and night inside of this building that there was no way to prove that those two were the ones who actually went in and killed Ruthie. To this day, no one else has ever been charged with Ruthie's murder.
It's a cover-up.
Ruthie became the basis for the very popular horror movie called The Candyman, starring Tony Todd. So, that's going to do it.
1992 Candyman full movie.
Just 5 more. Dude, that smells bad as I feel. Showers and
Daniel Robitaille was born January 17, 1865 at 6 p.m. at the Esplanade Plantation in New Orleans. He was the son of 2 slaves, Thea B. and Wendell Robitaille. But slavery was abolished just 2 weeks after his birth. After the American Civil War, his father, Wendell, made a considerable fortune after designing a device used to mass-produce shoes. So, Daniel was sent to all of the best schools and grew up in what was known as polite society. He developed a prodigious talent as an artist, and in his adulthood, many other wealthy people hired him to create portraits for them, which were meant to document their wealth and be a sign of their position in society. One of these commissions came from a wealthy landowner named Hayward Sullivan, who hired Daniel to capture his daughter's virginal beauty, as he puts it. Her name was Caroline Sullivan, and the only problem with this job is that her beauty did not stay virginal for very long. They fell in love, and in 1890, Caroline became pregnant, which was a big problem for her father, who was still transfixed by the legacy of slavery. After slavery ended, there was still a period of racial segregation, so Mr. Sullivan believed it was wrong for his white daughter to have a relationship with a black man.
Because God's word says it's
It was
wrong.
the same year that Robitaille's home
If
state
you don't understand your culture, you satanic
which
fucks.
required separate but equal train cars for black and white passengers. And this was just 4 years before the specific issue of interracial marriage would be addressed, when it would be outright prohibited in the state. But because there was no legal recourse at the time, Caroline's father hired some men to hunt Robitaille down and told them to get creative with the punishment. They finally tracked him down in an area in Chicago, Illinois that would eventually become known as Cabrini Green. I'm not sure why Daniel and Caroline were living there when both are from New Orleans, but it stands to reason that Caroline's father was such a wealthy landowner that he had land in multiple states. Whatever the reason may be, Daniel Robitaille was caught by the men, and they proceeded to saw off his right hand and smear his body with honey stolen from the local aviary. People in town had gathered around to watch the torture, and one kid takes a piece of honeycomb with his finger, resulting in the coining of Robitaille's iconic nickname. And the whole crowd just starts chanting Candyman over and over. This is also the origin of one of Candyman's often repeated catchphrases. The line actually comes from William Shakespeare's Hamlet, at the funeral of Hamlet's love interest, Ophelia. Ophelia's mother is scattering flowers on her daughter's grave when she says the line. So this woman saying it during the lynching of Candyman is doing so in a mocking way. And that's when the huge swarm of bees located their stolen honeycomb and furiously attacked the man covered in their honey. Robitaille was stung to death by the bees. But it's said that Caroline's pain was even greater than his own. He promises that his captors will all be damned, as her father contemptuously holds her mirror up to his face to show him the monstrosity that he had become, claiming Caroline wouldn't even look at him now. Daniel Robitaille's last words are Candyman, as he passes away while staring into the mirror. But something happened that day, and when Caroline retrieves the mirror, she sees his soul Then there's the most notable victim, a graduate student at UIC named Helen Lyle. Including Queen Mary I of England, an American serial killer named Mary Worth, Hungarian serial killer Countess Elizabeth Bathory, or even a Salem witch trial victim named Mary from the early modern era. I honestly don't know how Elizabeth Bathory's name got in the mix because her name isn't even Mary. It might just be one of those things where 2 different urban legends merge with the passage of time, much like Sherman Fields and Daniel Robitaille. Also, quick timeline note about Sherman Fields. At one point, there was an article claiming that he died in 1970, but I'd have to trust the title card that claims it was 1977. The title card is always all-known. And to back this up, there's a flyer at an art gallery that... 1977. The title card is always all-known. And to back this up, there's a flyer at an art gallery that claims that it happened in the late 70s. This may be a continuity error, but I choose to look at it as another example of the nature of folklore. As retellings continually reshape a story, you end up with different versions that have different details. We see the same effect happen all the time in the news today. I recently watched a video from a creator named Upper Echelon where he compares the modern news cycle to the children's game Telephone. In Telephone, you start with one phrase and each kid whispers it to the kid next to them, and once you get all the way around the circle, the original phrase is often changed entirely. And in his video, he talks about how the same thing is happening with news publishers writing articles on other news publishers' articles, and then journalists getting their info secondhand from those articles, etc., etc. And you end up with the original statement being completely changed or exaggerated due to the bias in how each writer interprets the message of the previous writer. So the same thing seems to be going on in Candyman. In 1981, Philip Purcell, an anthropology professor at University of Illinois Chicago, or UIC for short, wrote a paper on Candyman which didn't exactly help the legend die. At some point, most likely in the mid-80s, a gang leader started terrorizing the neighborhood, calling himself Candyman. While we don't know exactly what his motivation was, I imagine that he thought some non-skeptics would come to believe that the angry spirit of Daniel Robitaille was the one committing his heinous crimes. And that's essentially what happened on the particularly disturbing April 22, 1987.
All I know was there was some lady in a tub and she heard a noise. I think her name was Ruthie Jean.
When Ruthie Jean called the police, they didn't believe her, giving ample time for the gangster to break into her apartment through the medicine cabinet that conjoined her bathroom to the vacant unit. She was later found to have been killed with a hook. And if that idea isn't disquieting enough, it may not bring you any comfort to learn that this actually happened. Ruthie Mae McCoy was a real woman who was killed in Chicago after a man came in through her medicine cabinet, and she was the inspiration for the identical crime that took place in the original 1992 film, Candyman. Ruthie McCoy's name was kind of split into two characters, Ruthie Jean, the woman who was killed in her apartment, and Anne-Marie McCoy, her neighbor who later faced some horrors of her own at the expense of her infant son. Ruthie Mae McCoy also had schizophrenia. In Candyman, the protagonist, Helen, is made to look like she has schizophrenia by Candyman to hide his involvement and make her look guilty. This creates a direct link between the mental illness and the Candyman mythos. In real life, police didn't believe Ruthie when she called 911 because they knew she had schizophrenia. But in the movie, they didn't believe her because they didn't believe in Candyman. A reporter for the Chicago Reader discovered that bathroom cabinet break-ins were quite common and well known by residents of the Abbott Homes apartments where McCoy lived. Apparently, the bathroom cabinets had been installed back-to-back with a 2-foot-wide pipe chase running between the apartments. They were loosely attached to the walls with just 6 flimsy nails to make it easy for plumbers to access the pipes for repairs. The newspaper in Candyman tells an almost identical story, with, of course, a few key details changed. The killer or killers of Ruthie Jean smashed their way through the back of the medicine cabinet in the small apartment bathroom. The attack took place at the Cabrini Green housing project. This mysterious attack brings the total of unsolved murders in the housing project to an alarming 26 just this year. It's interesting how the headline says what killed Ruthie Jean and not who killed Ruthie Jean. While the gangster posing as Candyman built fear in the community without summoning the real thing, the legend was also alive and well outside of Cabrini Green. One particularly chilling example happened in the late 80s, maybe 1988.
Happened a few years ago near Moses Lake in Indiana.
A babysitter named Clara is visited by a guy she has the hots for named Billy and challenges him to try summoning Candyman, but stops him short of saying his name. After he goes downstairs, she, for unknown reasons, completes the ritual by reciting the name for the 5th time. When she turned on the light, she saw him standing there behind her. Her blood leaked through the ceiling, and Candyman killed the baby too. Billy survived, but his hair turned white from shock. This brings up a few questions about the rules around summoning Candyman. In this instance, we learn a few things. Number 1, it doesn't have to be the same person saying the name each time. Whoever says it the 5th and final time will be considered the summoner, and that'll be the person who faces his round. Number 2, there doesn't appear to be a time limit. You can pause as long as you want between each Candyman, which people love to do. There's always a ridiculous dramatic pause before saying it for the final time. In fact, the 5 declarations of the name don't even have to be consecutive. You can interrupt the ritual with other dialogue, but the say my name counter doesn't stop. Around this time, there was also another story involving a handicapped boy who was killed by Candyman in a public restroom in Cabrini Green while his mom was shopping across the street. When a man went in to check on him, it said that his hair also turned white. This boy was most likely a victim of the gangster posing as Candyman, not the supernatural Candyman himself. Then there's the most notable victim, a graduate student at UIC named Helen Lyon.
Cabrini Green, Chicago, 1992.
Yeah, I'm going to ignore this newspaper headline from 1991 and assume that the guy who wrote a book on Candyman has his dates correct. 1992 it is. Helen and her classmate, Bernadette, are working on a project on urban legends. She's also married to a professor, Trevor, who teaches a class on modern folklore. On the board, you can see some of the common elements that he's identified in neighborhood legends. Some, if only a little basis in truth, youth, often a victim seeking revenge, resides in a forbidden area, keep children from the area. This is also probably a reference to the original story, and deformities and appliances, blades, hooks, etc. These are obviously all traits that apply to the Candyman legend, but he sees these urban legends as more of a reflection of societal fears rather than a supernatural phenomenon, which is basically what Candyman is in our world. We have a term for that here in horror history, cultural legendizing. Candyman is a metaphor for racial segregation in the same way that Godzilla represents nuclear fallout, the Demogorgon represents fears of communism, and La Llorona represents issues in Central American marriage practices.
These stories are oral folklore. They are the unself-conscious reflection of the fears of urban society.
As part of her research, Helen talks to a woman familiar with the story of Ruthie Jean, and when Candyman is brought up, she becomes visibly uncomfortable. She eventually discovers that her own apartment was originally supposed to be a housing project with the same layout as the building in Cabrini Green. And after replacing the mirror, her and Bernadette recite the illicit name into it 4 times, but notably, only Helen completes the ritual by saying the 5th, after a 4-second pause for dramatic effect, of course. However, Candyman does not act against Helen immediately. The next day, they go to visit the actual apartment where Ruthie Jean lost her life in Cabrini Green, and they're instantly spotted and suspected to be released by the locals. They discovered graffiti referencing the original legend, and a huge painting of Robitaille in what's left of Jean's former apartment. She also finds a pile of candy and a razor blade. Could this mean that someone in the building is the actual criminal who framed Sherman Fields? I think that may be the case. Fields passed away in 1977, and Ruthie Jean's apartment wouldn't have been vacated until 10 years later, meaning that this candy was placed here well after his death. This is where Candyman first approaches Helen. However, she doesn't realize it until later when reviewing the photos. On the way out, they meet a woman named Anne-Marie McCoy, who explains that she heard Ruthie screaming through the wall the night of the murder and dialed 911, but nobody came. Anne-Marie claims that she's scared for her son, because they're never going to catch Candyman. Helen would later go back alone and meet a boy named Jake, who refuses to talk out of fear that the Candyman will get him. He does, however, lead her to the bathroom where the other young boy was once killed. She finds more Sweets to the Sweet graffiti, and all of the toilets are destroyed except for the last one, which is completely filled with bees. She doesn't know it yet, but this is the first hallucination that she's seeing as a result of Candyman's influence. Actually, I'm not sure if hallucination is the right word. When someone summons the Candyman, he or she can see the spirit and the colony of bees that come with it, but others cannot. However, they're not hallucinations. Candyman's hook really can pierce, and the bees really can sting. One thing that is definitely not a hallucination of any kind is the gang leader who's been going around calling himself Candyman. And when he shows up and traps her in the bathroom, it's bad news for Helen Barr. She's lucky to survive his attack, but one silver lining is that the police are finally able to arrest the man who killed Ruthie Jean. Nobody was willing to testify against him until now. Once he's arrested, belief in the Candyman around Cabrini Green reaches an all-time high, to finally make his presence known to Helen, as she's reviewing photos in the university park.
Do I know you?
No. But you doubted me.
Once Helen realizes who he really is, Candyman explains that he was obliged to come because she didn't believe in the legends.
I am the writing on the wall, whispered in the classroom. Without these things, I am nothing. Somehow, I will shed innocent blood.
Essentially, he's saying that he must continue to kill in order to keep his legend alive. But contrary to what you would expect based on his behavior so far, he doesn't kill Helen. Instead, she wakes up in the bathroom back at Anne-Marie's apartment, where she finds the dog beheaded and the baby, Anthony, missing. Before long, police storm in and apprehend her. So why does Candyman frame her instead of just killing her? This will become more evident throughout his story, but I think Candyman sees something in Helen that reminds him of his love from 1890, Carol. He doesn't just want to kill Helen, he wants her to join him. But we'll get into that a little bit later. After she's bailed out of jail, he appears to her again, but
This story inspired a popular horror movie and
Candyman documentary.
August 1973. A terrified teenager reports a fatal shooting just outside of Houston, Texas.
When I got there, walked in and saw the naked body with him shot 6 times, and I knew that this was not just an ordinary shooting.
The discovery exposes a crime so chilling that even hardened detectives find themselves reeling in horror.
Like, comment, subscribe, you guys.